So there was one that was more general about COVID, reflections on COVID. And, it's last week, I forgot the exact date, but it marked 1 year since we had a shutdown in many places in the United States, including California. And it's been quite an interesting journey, as many of you probably remember. I remember myself, we were hearing that it would probably be a few weeks and then life would be back to normal. And so that's what I was expecting. Here we are a year later, and clearly we're not back to normal at all. So it's been quite an interesting year and something to reflect on. So to begin with, one of the interesting things I've experienced and many people I've talked to have is that this last year has been in some ways the longest and the shortest year at the same time. And we might think, how might that be? Time is this, of course, we try to keep track of it in a way that might seem objective, but our experience of it is very subjective, and it's not something that we can say it's always going to feel the same. Obviously, when you're having fun, you might feel like time is going by more than if you're not having a good time. As we age, we know that time feels like it's going shorter. That's why when you're dealing with a child, you want to be very aware that time is in a way dilated for them, meaning that, okay, it's just 20 minutes, but to a 3-year-old child, 20 minutes feels like such a long time, especially depending on what's going on. But so we've experienced time subjectively. And so how it could be the shortest and the longest, the reason why I think that's the case is that it feels short this last year because many of the things that we usually do in the course of a year, that we commemorate things like holidays and going on certain trips or doing certain different types of events, they didn't happen this last year. And I had the experience also, many people told me the same thing, where they would think about a time, they say, oh yeah, last July, and they'd realize like, oh no, wait, it was July 2019. But because of the way July 2020 was, where maybe not much was going on as far as things we usually did, it felt like it didn't happen. So in that way, this year felt very short because many of the things we usually experience that let us know time is passing or that a year is passing didn't happen. And I think it's interesting the way we experience time. It really is in a way like we feel like we're taking, we experience as if we're in a certain space with that time. I know there's time and space and things that I won't understand as far as the astrophysics goes and things of that nature. But there's a way we experience time. Like it feels like, oh, it's March again. For many Iranians, they feel Nowruz is approaching, and it can even affect the way that they feel. Last year, many of the things that help us know that time is passing didn't happen. So in that way, not a lot happened. So it felt like it happened very quickly, or it didn't even happen. But it feels long because we also, time felt like it was going slow. We weren't having as much enjoyment or fun as we usually do. So as a result, it felt like a very long year. So I think that's one of the interesting paradoxes of how we've experienced this last year, is that time has gone very slow and very fast in some ways. And that's kind of some of my thoughts on that. I also remember when the pandemic started, I had a very strange experience, as many people did, where, as I was talking about how we keep track of time, that nothing was happening, or it felt like nothing was happening. Things in my practice were changing. The radio, we were dealing with some things, so I didn't do my show for a couple of weeks, but a little bit of time. And strangely enough, one of the things that helped me feel like I still was grounded in time in some way was reading the books that I do. Because I read a book a week, and the fact that I was still doing that and looking at how far I was, interestingly, in the book, felt like, okay, I'm coming to the end of the week, and this is 1 week of time, and then the next week is starting. Because the usual ways of keeping track of time felt like they were not there. So that was another interesting experience that I wouldn't have thought that reading the books a week would give me some sense of grounding in the passage of time. But during those first, especially weeks of COVID, it definitely did that for me. And so, of course, there's so many different areas we can look at COVID and how it's affected us in different ways. And of course, sometimes we'll say we're all in this together. In a way we are, that we can try to band together and work together, one, to stop the spread of COVID, but also to come together to help each other. But of course, everyone is experiencing it in different ways, and it's not really fair to say everyone's in it together. We should be mindful of that when we recognize that some people are facing far bigger challenges than we might. So they might not feel there's so much in it together with us, or whoever you are, when they're going through all of that. Another thing we experience is that many of the things that we took for granted that have to happen didn't happen, and we saw we were okay. Not going into the office, not working as much, not doing certain things. We realized we were okay, and I think something that many people experienced, and like anything, it's not all good or all bad, but people were forced to be home more with their families. So there were more conflicts and things did arise, which itself is not necessarily bad. It's something to deal with. But people also spent more time with their kids than they ever had before. And I hope for some people, it was this recognition that, well, when we want to go back to normal, something that we hear a lot, was it so normal the way I was living my life and we as a society were living our lives? And do I want to rush back to that necessarily? And I think for a lot of people, and I hope for a lot of people, the answer would be no. If you were working 14 hours, and again, there are sometimes people who have certain demands on them, so necessities. But if you were working 14 hours a day and not seeing your children, and now you're home more, a lot of people realize, why was I doing that? This is more important than that, and I don't necessarily need to work that much, and we can reshape or shift our priorities. The pandemic made so many things close and stop that it was like a forced reset. You didn't plan on it, you didn't ask for it, but it did force you to reset a lot of things. And so if we were given the opportunity to restart the way we live our lives, what would you do the same and what would you do differently? Which is also a reminder of how we want to be intentional in how we live our lives in general. When I work with clients, even my own experience in talking to people, what we sometimes realize is life, it feels like it's happening to us more than it feels like we're choosing to live our lives. Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, then this is coming up, then I need to do this. Putting out all these little fires, just doing certain things that we feel we quote unquote have to do. And when we pause and take a look at things, we realize, wait, why am I doing all of these things? Do I have to do all of them? Would I choose to do all of them? And so it's a reminder to live an intentional life, meaning that you look at how you are using your time. What is in your life that you like and want to keep or want more of? What is there that you wish there was in your life that there isn't? Looking back on your life 10 years from now, or in these next 10 years, what would you feel would be missing if you continued living in this way, or what would you like to have be in your life? So I hope for everyone, as much as there is this rush to go back to normal, which is understandable because we missed so many things. When things go back to normal, there's a sense of calm that it gives us going back to how things were. Change always creates some anxiety. What I think is important that we realize that, do we need to rush back to how those things were if they were unhealthy? So much about our own lives and about society was unhealthy. We don't necessarily need to rush back to that. So I know I would try to get through these quickly, but clearly I'm not doing that. If you've listened to my show, you know that a lot of times isn't the case. Maybe I'll shift to this one. And I wrote them down mostly word for word. How do we deal with crazy people against the vaccine and all the wrong info that they have? So that was a question that was asked. So, as is often the case, if you approach anyone who disagrees with you with the mindset that they are crazy, you're probably not going to have a good conversation. And really, there probably isn't a hope or really a point to have a conversation with someone you're calling or considering crazy. So to begin with, I did get the vaccine, and I'm not a medical expert by any means, but I think for anyone who is eligible, and if they talk to their doctors and make sure there are no considerations for them, I hope that people would get the vaccine. I think it makes sense. Do I know exactly what's in the vaccine, everything, and can I know what will be the long-term results? Of course not, but I do have that type of faith in science and the scientific community and I do have faith that there are people that would want to make a vaccine. Yes, people will make money off of it, but I do believe that people would even want to make a vaccine to help people, not just because of the financial benefit to themselves. So I do have that faith in people and in the scientific community. So I got the vaccine, of course, not knowing 100%. But anyway, people who, don't agree or will read something or have heard something, whatever that might be. As I said, if you approach the conversation as they are crazy, you probably won't get very far. The book I discussed, Think Again, by Adam Grant, I think has some good talking points about, or good advice on how to deal with people who disagree with you. And the first point is, I would say, don't try so hard to convince them, as in pull them. Usually if you try to pull at someone, even in a physical way, they're going to pull back. And so that's what happens when you have a conversation, especially if you attack them personally as well as on their ideas, calling them crazy, calling them stupid. Well, you're not going to likely get very far. But if you actually give them space to come towards you, there's more of a chance. And I would also say, when you start the conversation, yes, on some things you might feel like you're definitely right, but first we have to also be aware that we could be wrong. That's something that, unfortunately, I think with the advent of social media is becoming even more prevalent, that people think they have to proclaim their opinion as some kind of it's been dictated by God that this is a truth. This is how we should deal with schools. This is the right way to deal with the economy, with COVID, with this, with that. We have to all act as if we know exactly the truth, even when experts in a certain field might not agree about what to do or what would happen if we do X, Y, or Z thing. So I think it's important to be a little bit more humble and have that intellectual humility that I could be wrong, or I don't know for sure. Here's what I think, here's what I believe. I'll share it with you, but can't say I know something. I know this is this way. What are you saying? You're crazy or stupid. If you go into that mindset, you're probably going to have a bad conversation. But if you're open, that helps. So that's actually an interesting thing. If you're wanting the person you're talking to be open to hearing you, you have to make sure you're open to hearing them. But if you go into the conversation, I'm going to convince you, I'm going to force you, I'm going to overpower you to change your mind, and we tell ourselves because I'm right, well, you're likely not going to get very far, and they'll feel your defensiveness and how closed you are, and likely they'll be more closed too. But if you begin the conversation with, here's what I think, let me give you the reasons why, what do you think? Let's talk about it. You're more likely to, one, have a good conversation, and two, again, we want to recognize that our goal shouldn't be, I'm going to go in and change your mind. It should be, I want to have a discussion and a conversation with you, which is very different than just changing someone's mind. And so also when you're dealing with people who disagree with you, you can make efforts if you'd like to communicate and open that discourse, but recognize that it's not your responsibility to change their mind, and that it's very hard to change people's minds when they believe something strongly. So be mindful of that when you enter the conversation as well.